Hello and welcome to our art tutorial for today. So we've been studying about polar bears and the Arctic animals there. So I thought it fitting that we did an Arctic landscape featuring our furry friend and our mascot, our polar bear. So the items that you'll need today, they can be at your house. And if you don't have these particular materials, any paint will work. Any type of paper will work, and water, white paint, salt, paper towels, okay? So we're going to need a watercolor palette. It's okay if it's an older one. All you need is a little bit of water, and it will help rehydrate your palette. You'll need a paintbrush, particularly one that has a wider brush or bristle set. You'll need some just white paint. Any white paint will do. You'll need some table salt, just a little bit of table salt. An empty cup. You'll need some paper towels and plastic wrap or cling wrap and some cotton balls. Lastly, this stencil right here. If you do not have a polar bear stencil, that is okay. You can paint your own polar bear and have your own touch on it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Now in the Arctic, we know it's a cold climate and they do not get a lot of sunlight. So there are two colors that we're mainly going to use in this art tutorial, okay? We're going to use purple and blues right here. Blue is going to be my ice sculpture on the bottom that will hold my polar bear. They'll be standing on some ice. And purple, I think, is going to be my skyline. So to get started, we're going to do a technique. If you need to, go ahead and hydrate your palette. So that means just putting water directly into the color you're going to use. You can decide if you want to do purple in the sky like I am and blue for the ice, or you can flip it. You can do blue for the sky and purple for the ice, or you can do a mixture of both as well. So the first technique is I'm going to start with the sky. We want to make sure that this is a time-sensitive project. We want to make sure that our paper is still wet when we go to do the other steps, okay? So first, we're going to do a wet-on-wet technique, which means I'm going to do wet water on my paper first, and then I'm going to do wet paint on top of that. So just take your water and your brush, and you're going to go ahead and just paint water onto your wet watercolor paper. If you do not have watercolor paper, thick cardstock will work, or really thick construction paper, or even multimedia paper, that will work. Printer paper is not the best, but if that's all you have on hand, that'll be fine. You just might not want to do this wet on wet technique, or if you do, just do a little bit of water, okay? You cannot really see it, but I'm painting water right onto my watercolor paper. And this is so that my pigment, my color, when I go to paint it on, it will actually just spread right onto my paper. I'm going to go ahead and now, since I have a nice layer of water, I'm going to dip into my purple, add some water and color on there, and then I'm going to just dab. And you'll start to see that, oh my goodness, it's starting to spread on that wet that I just painted on, okay? That is pretty cool, right? And you'll see that it spreads. If you don't want to wait for it to spread and you want to just paint, go ahead and just paint right over it. So again, this wet on wet technique helps provide fluid movement with the paint and the pigment so that it really adds this kind of cool texture and sky-like qualities in it, okay? Now you'll see that I'm leaving a bit, I'm only painting half of my paper. I left a ridge here so that when I paint my ice, it'll be kind of like a mountain or a little hill. And I'm also leaving a little bit of a border around the edge of my paper. You don't have to leave a border if you don't want to. That's okay. You can paint completely to the edge. Just be mindful of whatever surface you're on and maybe put a tablecloth or cardboard or something to protect your surface. All right, you know what? I like that. And I think I'm going to even add a little bit of blue. I'm going to kind of mix it in and add some blue swirls here. It'll add some wintry textures and just different dimension, different colors. I'll add some blue over here. And you'll see that with watercolor, it's just blending in together with the purple that was already there. I'll add some blue here, and I'll just keep mixing it on in like that. Again, art is unique. It's your own personal touch. So you add whatever you want, you do however you want to do, okay? All right, now, remember how I said that we want to make sure that our paper is still wet, watercolor is still wet? You might notice some buildup on the side. If you leave this here, it'll start to dry that way, and leave it so that it will be hardened and just dark on that side of the paper. So I'm going to use the edge. I'm not going to push too hard, but I'm going to let it soak up that extra watercolor paper that's right there. so that it doesn't dry too hard. But if you want to leave it, that's fine. You'll also see a pool right here and that my paper is starting to rise up. That's because the watercolor paper is absorbing all that water, so it's soaking all of it up. It will dry and it will start to flat or even bow out the other way. That is okay. Do not worry about it. Now, while my paper is still wet, I'm going to take my empty cup and one of my paper towels, and I'm going to fold it and put it over the edge of my cup like this so that I have a nice edge. If you have a toilet paper roll or a paper towel roll, this technique will work just as fine. The reason I'm going to do this is I'm going to add a moon. It's going to be a nighttime wintry scene. So I'm going to use this kind of like a stamp, and I'm going to decide where I want my moon. And you know what? I think I want my moon here. So I'm going to just take my circular surface and press it right into my paper for a little bit, kind of wiggle around, and then I'm going to pick straight up. And there you have it. You have a moon that looks like it's glowing on the edges. You'll even see some purple and blue still there. So it adds some more texture and dimension. I really like that right there. All right. Now, next, I'm going to take my table salt, and we've used this technique before if you've been in my class. And I'm going to sprinkle as much salt as I want on my paper while it's still wet. This will make salt, soaks up and dries out things. So it's going to soak up this extra, or some of the, wherever the salt is touching, it's going to soak it up. It's going to make kind of like ice crystals, and it looks like snowflakes. So it's just another thing to add texture. If you don't want to add texture, that is completely fine. You do not have to do the salt. If you don't want to add a moon, that is fine. But when this all dries, we'll wipe off the salt and we'll be left with these really cool designs. You see this big puddle here? That is perfectly fine. It's going to end up pretty cool, and it kind of looks like just maybe a dark shadow is back there. Now, while that is drying, I can go ahead and move on to my ice down here. So again, I'm going to not do the wet on wet, so that means I'm not going to paint my surface with water first. I'm going to use just my water, and then I'm going to use my blue because I wanted blue on my as the ice structure down here. You can use whichever two colors you wanted. Again, it's your art, your unique, your wonderful, you can choose. So I'm going to dip right into my color and then paint right onto my surface, okay? Just right onto my surface. The more pigment that's on there, the darker color it will be when we're done. But this is also time sensitive, which means that I want to paint kind of as quickly but as nice as possible so that it doesn't dry out, so that when I go to do the next technique, it will work out. I see that I'm running out of water in my palette, so I'm going to just add some more. Now, I'm just going, and again, I'm leaving an edge. You do not have to leave an edge on your paper if you do not want to. That's fine. But now I'm going to carefully, and it's watercolor paper, so it's watercolor, so it will start to bleed together, and that is okay, blend together. So I'm just going to go along the edge, and there's that blending I'm talking about where it's coming down from my sky that I painted and moving to the next part. And I'm just going to get as close as possible. I don't have to get all the way, so I'll just leave that little white part. Go over a couple more times. I think I want a darker blue. Again, the more pigment you use, the darker it will be. Okay. And I think I like that. So now, while it is still drying, I'm going to take my plastic wrap, my cling wrap right here. I'm going to take this, and I can fold it if I want to, but you see how there's some ridges and bumps already in my plastic wrap? Well, we're going to put it directly onto our wet ice, so it will kind of make different ice crystals in the texture, okay? So I'm going to carefully lay this down, and you can pick it back up if it's not where you want it to be. But I'm going to try not to get to my sky because my sky has my salt, and I just want this. But I'm going to pinch, and I'm going to push my plastic wrap together so it forms these pockets of air underneath, and it's going to dry and make these really cool crystal designs right in here. I really, really like this a lot. All right, I can pinch and do as much as I want. And then, you know what, friends? We're actually just going to stop here. Once I think that I'm good, I'm going to stop here and let this completely dry. You can leave it on the surface that you need or that you had it on. You know what? I can even add some more salt, and my ice is protected from my plastic wrap. But I need to make sure that this is completely dry before I paint my polar bear friend on it. Because if it's not dry, then our polar bear friend will not be so polar bear-like on there, okay? So leave it to completely dry, and then when you're ready, go ahead and unpause the video, okay? And I'm back. Okay, so I already moved ahead and I had done this before. So look at this. I took off my plastic wrap and it left these such cool textures in here. That salt that we left up here, look what happened. It absorbed all of that. So I'm just gonna wipe off the salt, do this probably over a trash can so that you're not just getting salt on your ground. But I love this so much. So the last thing I need to do is I need to add my polar bear friend. One of the last things. You can decide with your stencil if you want your polar bear, and again, if you don't have a stencil, you can just paint a polar bear. But decide if you want it facing the moon, if you want it kind of over the sky or down just on the ice. You can have it facing the other way, whichever you prefer. I think I'm going to put my polar bear friend right here. And I'm going to hold it down and I'm going to take my white paint and my cotton ball and I'm going to just dip it lightly into my white paint and then I'm just going to, like a sponge, just dab it right on. I'm going to just dab and dab, dab. And you want to kind of make sure that you're holding on to it so that the polar bear structure will stay and the stencil will stay and you'll be left with this really nice, cool looking polar bear. Now this is really cool because it adds texture and it looks like almost like fur. All right, so I'm just dabbing all along, dabbing, 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 leaving that really nice looking polar bear there for us. And my cotton ball is kind of coming apart, but that's okay. If it gets stuck on there, it'll kind of look like fur. You know, polar bears are furry, but we also know that they have black skin underneath because that helps absorb any of the light. I can put as much white paint as I want. You know what? I'll call this good. I think I'm proud of that right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully, very carefully, pick up my stencil off of my polar bear and I'll be left with my polar bear, just like that. Oh my goodness. Now, my friends, once this dries, if you want to take a black marker or even a black pen, you can go ahead and draw an eye, maybe some claws, and you're done. You're left with this beautiful wintry scene in the Arctic. I hope you enjoyed, my friends, and I cannot wait to see your awesome